webinar today. Today, we're going to be talking about making selectors that don't suck. And that's actually our official marketing thing right now. So I'm loving that. But the goal is to make it so that, use AI to make it so that your existing Selenium test, your existing Appium or Cypress test, or whichever test framework you're using, make it so that those tests can be less brittle, easier to build, easier to maintain using AI. And so what we've done with TestAI, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about what exactly we've got going on here. So agenda, today we're going to talk first about TestAI itself, what it is and what it means to use the TestAI SDK. And after that, we're going to actually go into a demo where I show what we do with the SDK and what that gives us when we've got existing test automation. We're going to go over creating backup selectors with AI for your existing Selenium tests. We're going to go over using AI native selectors to add additional resilience and flexibility to your test scripts. And then finally, we're going to show you what it looks like to use our machine learning cloud for interactive test case development in Selenium. And then we'll get to Q&A. One quick note, I like to talk. So please feel free to post questions up in our Q&A or our chat. I will take breaks and answer them. And that way I'm not just like talking through the whole way. But really quick overview of what TestAI is. TestAI is a test automation platform that is built from the ground up using AI. What that means is that we use machine learning models to visualize, to understand, and to interact with your app. So we have bots that can go into your app, identify the elements you can interact with, identify how to interact with them. We use bots to train. Well, we train our bots to understand your application, to understand what is where and what's important, how to navigate, how to get from point A to point B. And the upshot of using AI first is that it dramatically simplifies and improves the resilience of tests. It simplifies them because it's like working with a manual tester. You say, this is what's on the application. This is where this is what we care about. And at that point, they know where to click and what to do and where to go. There's no script. You don't have to script a manual tester. Manual testers are completely DOM agnostic. They don't care what platform the app's built in. They just care about working with it. And so AI lets us do the same thing with automation. And also lets us do point and click test creation, which means that you can bring in non-technical people to do your test automation with you. And finally, because we're visual first, because you can see what the bot's doing and how it interacts, and because we're training the bot actively the way you would with a manual tester, that also simplifies test maintenance. It means you don't have to go back into the DOM to understand what changed. You're not dependent on the DOM. You're not dependent on what framework an application is built on or what platform the application is running on. We just say, this has changed, this user flow has changed, that's your maintenance. And so with AI, we're able to fundamentally change how we do testing in software. So TestAI SDK, we have our TestAI desktop platform, and we've been using it, and we've been thinking, we provide these benefits for the people using our product. Let's make sure that we can bring AI out to everyone else. And so we've taken our machine learning engine, we've taken our ability to go in, parse and classify applications, and we've made it so that you can import it into Selenium and Appium, and we have more platforms on the horizon. Directly into your code, use it, run it, it works, and you don't have to do really anything to modify or change your code to take advantage of AI. And we use this again, we tie this in with one-step visual AI element identification, which we'll show you. And we can also use cloud-hosted machine learning to help train for your app. All right. So the process of adding AI to an existing Selenium app is really not difficult or time consuming at all. First step is you sign up for SDK. Second step is you import TestAI into your Selenium scripts. It's those lines of code right there. And the last step is you do whatever else you do. I know that's a bit anticlimactic there, and I was sort of tempted to just end the seminar here because oh, that's it. But that really is what it is. That's what you do to get TestAI running. And I'll show you right now. We've got a demo where we're going to add AI to a Selenium test I've got set up. We're going to update that Selenium test so we can take advantage of AI native selectors, and we're going to continue to improve and build that test with AI. So let's push this over here. I'm going to go ahead and set this up so I can keep these slides open, or else I will get wildly confused at some point. And then, yeah, my team will laugh to no end as I get sidetracked. But yeah, so we've got our slides there. So let me start off and just show you what we're going to be testing. So, sorry, TestAI has a store. This is the TestAI store. It is lovely. We keep nothing in stock. Do not order anything from it. I say that every time. I know that people are getting tired of it, but I cannot emphasize this enough. We keep nothing in stock. Do not buy it. But yes, so we have an ad, we have a store, we have items in the store. We like to test that we can actually add items to the cart, validate that that workflow is run properly. And in order to make things a little bit more interesting, because that is what I do, we're going to do our start point not from the store's homepage here. We're going to do it from Google, because, and this, I'm actually going to talk about this more next week when we talk about our TestAI desktop application. But I have next to no control over WordPress. It drives me bonkers, and that's actually a wonderful place for AI first automation, because I have no control over what's going on the back end. But it's frustrating when I want to demo what happens when developers screw up your tests. So here I've got Google, and this isn't real Google. This is a version of Google that I've got spun up on my local machine. So I have control. And so what we're going to see here is this is what I have control over. This is Google, and this is the heart of the Google page. This is their search input right here, this little guy right here. And as you can see, this is made easy for Selenium automation. Again, with Selenium automation, in order to get to, for those of you who haven't worked with it before, in order to automate a web page or an application of any sort, traditional automation requires that we get down into the code underlying this application. So in this case, we're getting into the DOM, and in order to mess with our little input here, what we're really testing with Selenium is we're not testing this. We're not testing this page at all. We don't care about what's actually on the page. We're testing this code. We're testing that this shows up, that this is present somewhere, or at least that the code recognizes as such. This might not be visible on the page, but if I can find this, if I can find it using this little ID right here, then I can build tests on it, right? And so with Selenium, I've got control over this little page here. And let's go ahead and come over to here. There we go. So we've got this here, and I've got a test script here. And this is a very, very simple test script. Our first step is we're going to go ahead. You recognize this ID here. We're going to find that search element. We're going to do a search on it. And then we're going to go through a series of steps where we are going to identify whether a particular image shows up on the page. So here's the DOM code that I'm going to be looking for this search image. We're going to verify that we're able to we're going to click on the link to it and then go to the product page, verify that that image shows up here. And again, here's how I'm going to find that same image on this page here. But you notice this is a very, very different code, because it's going to be very, very different location based on the DOM and based upon how we're hosting the image. So a very, very different map to the same thing, essentially. And then we're going to go ahead, we're going to click on an add to cart button and go into the cart, verify that things showed up. So this is a very, very simple test. Now let's go ahead and let's get this started with AI. So this is a very simple test. This is just pure Selenium. And now we're going to AI-ify it. And before I do that, do we have any questions? All right, excellent. So to AI-ify your test, again, this is a very, very simple 2.5-step process. We're going to go to TestAI.SDK, click on sign up for the SDK. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create an account. Bear with me a quarter second here. Find some password that'll actually be secure. There we go. We have a secure password. We have signed up for the SDK. And this is our first major hurdle. Second major hurdle, this is what you'll first see when you come in with the SDK. You've got some information. We've got a tutorial here. We've got documentation here. This is actually what our tutorial looks like here. And the core thing we have here is we have this API key. This lets us interact with your application. So we need to install our package, add this code. Let's go in here really quickly. I'm walking through the whole thing here. Just let's see. Walking through the whole thing here just so you can get a full sense for what this takes to do. There we go. We've installed TestAI. Now, literally, I'm just going to copy and go into our source code here. And here we've got where we're creating our driver. I'm going to add this in. There you go. So essentially what we're doing here is we've got our existing Chrome driver coming in. We imported TestAI, got our API key. And so we're putting a wrapper around the driver here. And so what this does is it means that you can use the Chrome driver as Chrome driver. We have all the same functionality, all the same hooks, but we've also added additional functionality that allows us to use AI. All right, so actually really quickly before I run this, I'm gonna answer a couple of quick questions here. So first from Sumati, does this support Java scripting, or the Selenium script should be in Python? So right now we have Selenium in Python and we've got Appium in Java, and we're continuing to add new languages and platforms as we speak. We've just got a bunch on the roadmap, and these are the first ones that we did based upon industry demand. All right, and then this PyCharm editor, I'm not using PyCharm, I'm actually using VS Code. I should use PyCharm. I get a lot of flack for not using PyCharm, but I was originally a JavaScript developer, and it's been really hard to leave that behind, you know? I love VS Code, but yeah, you can use PyCharm. It doesn't really matter what editor we're using. But yeah, so to go back to what we've done here, I've gone ahead, I've used pip to install the TestAI SDK, and then I've copied and pasted these 3 lines of code, importing TestAI, add the API key, then wrap our driver with TestAI. So we have all the inherent functionality of Chrome driver with AI added to it. And that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run this. And so what's happening here is our bot's going through. It's going to go ahead. It's going to identify all the elements that we're going to test against. There we go. Test automation anchor bracelet. There is our anchor bracelet. And if you look closely, there's no anchors on that bracelet. I'm still baffled as to how we ended up there, but it's wonderful for testing purposes. Anyways, so look at the anchor bracelet, validate that that image is in. And one thing I want to point out really quickly, we've just ran a validation on this image here, on this anchor bracelet image. I'll go back to that code really quickly because this is important. So what I did is I looked for this selector here and verified that it was present on the DOM. But what I didn't do, I didn't verify that this selector actually shows an anchor bracelet. This could have showed SpongeBob for all I care. And the second thing it doesn't do is it doesn't verify this actually loaded on the page. It verifies that this code showed up in the DOM behind the scenes, but it doesn't verify that the image loaded, that there's not a broken link. All it does is that. And if I was to go in and make this a lot more complicated, I can do validations like that in Selenium. I have to go in, I have to pull the element, look for actual dimensions on it. I have to look, I can go back to the source link, look for a 200 response when I query it. But even then, in order to verify that's actually the image, I need to have a copy of the image and run a diff on it using CV tools or something like that to make sure that the image actually showed up. And as anybody who's done that can tell you, there's a lot that goes into trying to make that actually work, a lot of code. All right, so before we get into the next step here, before I show you the magic that we did, let's see, Satish asked, does this support Java? We support Java with Appium right now. We are continuing to add languages for both platforms, Apple Tools, Java, Selenium, Python, but we're going to be adding JavaScript, we're going to be adding Java, we're going to be adding different languages to support a variety of different, sorry, just totally blanked, to support a variety of different platforms. And using this for window-based applications. So for right now, we have focuses on Selenium and Appium. So mobile applications and web-based applications. We do have a desktop version of TestAI that is usable for Windows-based applications as well, but we'll be getting to that in a future session. All right, so before I get to that next question from Shama, I think this is going to answer it right here. So if I was to test using Selenium, it would be a nightmare to deal with the different source properties, to deal with change in source properties, or to try and verify that the image actually shows up. But let me show you what we've got with TestAI. So by adding these lines of code right here, our bot is able to go through and it's able to identify these actual elements. So we've gone through, we've trained them. And let me show you, let's see, this is one of our anchor braces right here. I'll show you this guy right here. That's our link right there. So, and that is product anchor bracelet image. And there's that. So we've now trained our machine learning model to recognize this image itself, not just the code behind it, not just the position in the DOM. It's going to recognize the actual code here. It's going to recognize the actual image when it comes across in the future. So that's lovely. And the other thing I want to show with that is we've got our little search box right here. There we go. So now our bot is trained on that search box. And that's hugely valuable because like every good developer, we pay developers to change stuff, right? And every developer is going to go ahead and they're going to change something. And that is going to make the QA engineers cry because they're going to change inevitably something that we're relying on for our test automation. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to change Google or change local Google. I don't have any power over Google. Change Google, and that's going to make it so that a traditional automation will fail running against that. But now that we've run this, now that we have this captured, I don't care that we've changed this. Let's run this again. There we go. Let's watch this a little bit while it's running. So there we go. It's looking for that. It's looking. And because we changed the DOM, it's not able to use those traditional selectors. And so now we've pulled this up and it says, hey, you know what? I can't find this. And all we have to do here now is train it. So now we've trained it. Now the automation is going to continue. And there we go. We'll roll through. But yeah, essentially all I did there is once our identifier failed, I was able to go in, train our machine learning model on the fly to identify what went wrong, to tell it what it needs to look for. And so in the future, this will now be a resilient test. There's no need for additional code, but now that identifier won't fail. If our developers go into the backend, they change us from Angular to React or Vue, doesn't matter. Our bot understands what these components are. It knows how to find them, knows how to interact with them. It's not going to care what the DOM looks like anymore. It's just going to do this. All right, so now that we've got that, let's take advantage of the second. Any questions before I move on? Because we just talked about, let's see where, there you go. Yeah, we just talked about adding backups. But I want to talk about using AI native identifiers as well. All right, so no new questions yet? Okay, so the second big problem that we run into with automation, again, is keeping track of all these different, oh, there we go, security. So we're sending app data back. So what we do is we send, we use encryption to protect against any interception in transit. We do not actually store the data. We process it and send it back. And yeah, so we don't keep data that could potentially be sensitive. All right. So now with this, let's see. All right. So yeah, so going back to where I was with this, let's see. So we've got the same image here. We're looking for the image again and again on these pages, but we have to keep track of different identifiers, different paths to get to each of these images on every page. And that's workable here because we've got one very simple test involving one very simple product. But this as anybody who's done automation can tell you, tracking fixtures, tracking these identifiers, maintaining them can become an absolute nightmare. You centralize them, you do your best you can, but you still end up with issues where things change, things are routed wrong. And it's sort of ridiculous to have, and in this case, we also do have our cart image that I never actually automated here, but I've got 3 different sets of code for one image, just because it's different locations than DOM and different resolutions. And that's a waste of my time. So the second thing we're going to do is we're going to continue to train our machine learning model here. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to just give this a name for our machine learning model here. There we go. So now that I know that, all I have to do here is search image. So all this does is when our machine learning model processes these elements, what it's going to do is it's going to assign a specific name to it. It's going to train against that. And what that does is it means that we can reference the same name for every image we do. And when we run this, I'm going to go ahead and run that again. So when we run this, now we're going to see that we've got multiple, once this is completed, we'll see that we'll have multiple images available for the same label. So we've done a more complicated, we've trained on multiple points of data, so that makes our machine learning model significantly more flexible. So it's training on a small, low resolution image, high resolution image, and we'll see what the impacts are for that in just a moment. So that's going to run through. We're going to add it to the cart. There we go. So let's pull that in. So now we have our image anchor bracelet. As you can see, we've got those same images here. They're collected, they've been labeled, but now because we've trained this machine learning model on multiple variations on the same image, what I can do is I can get back to this last little thing here, the add to cart. And instead of having to go through and use that third CSS selector here, I'm just going to go in. And so now this last will, we don't even have to worry about the CSS selector. We don't need to worry about the DOM path. We only have to worry about having the machine learning model trained. And so that means that it doesn't really matter where that image shows up in the future. We can find it, we can validate against it, we can click on it, we can interact with it. Our bot's just going to continue to work with us. And now we've made our bot smart and resilient. And frankly, we can go ahead. There we go. Add a little bounding box here to validate that. And complete. There we go. So now we've made, when labeled, moving on, item added to cart. We have fully validated this test using AI. And so now what I can do here is I can just take this, if I don't care about maintenance in the future. Simplify code, remove my identifiers, and the test will still run. Any questions before we get to the last step here? We've got 8 minutes to the half hour, so. Just verify that everything is showing up. Ah, there we go. They can be redundant. So Ajit asked a great question. It seems that traditional locators like ID, name, and XPath are redundant here with visual AI. Is that true? Answer is yes and no. So I'd say no in that if you simply want to add AI to your existing system and you don't want to do additional coding and you don't want to, you're not going to be maintaining or updating your tests, then there's no reason to get rid of your existing locators. We've just wrapped them in AI to make them more resilient. But as you build tests, the using AI first locators, using AI first identifiers really does make ID, name, and XPath redundant. In the same way that a manual tester doesn't care about the underlying ID of an element, doesn't care about the XPath, doesn't care about the name, doesn't care about the class. In the same way that a user won't care, our bot doesn't care. And so, we can start moving away from these brittle, we can start moving away from these brittle identifiers that rely on. And I remember when, as a test automation engineer, you work with your developers to say, okay, I need these identifiers for these elements so I can make my test run. And ultimately, I'm sitting there, I'm having them build the app so I can test their code, but I'm not actually testing, it ended up being a weird loop of making my developers do things to make my testing easier, but then when they change something, my tests become more vulnerable. And so our goal is to make our tests completely independent from the changes that your developers will make. All right, so let's see, another quick question here. So Samadhi, does this support automatic healing for locator failures? Yes, and that's the ultimate goal for this. So with this one here, so this locator here, we're finding the search bar by element ID. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but here I changed that ID. I broke it. I could remove this ID. I could change it entirely. I could, in cases where you're looking at links or buttons, I can even change the element type. It doesn't have to be button. It can be a link in a link in a div with correct styling. Because we're visual first, we're not going to care if it's visually similar to what it was supposed to be. We can find it. If it's, the goal is to build this, to be able to build tests that will test user experience. We spent too long testing code. We spent too long testing the underlying DOM and not enough time. There's a reason why we break out from functional to non-functional, why we break out user experience testing as a non-functional test. When the reality is, ultimately, the success or failure of an application is the user experience. It's sort of a weird disconnect there, right? But yeah, so we support automatic healing for locator failures simply because we move away from depending on the locator. All right, so Mohit, what happens if the item is out of stock? How will it handle the failures? So we can build this app to look for, if, say that we get into, here we go. I'm actually probably going to show more than I really need to here, but say we get into here and the item's out of stock, it's not able to be added to the cart, we would fail on the validation on this image here. We can also add more, I built this script as a very, very simple demonstration, but we can also add try catch. We can add different paths to identify and validate against different failure modes, failure messages, screen failures, failure to load images, things like that. And so we'd handle those failures in the way that we normally would with Selenium. We'd use an assert statement, passive fail, and things like that. All right, we've got about 4 minutes left.
One more question from Milton.
Oh, yes, excellent. AI locator saved after you train the bot. So what we have here is, this is your personal AI cloud right here. And so you're able to go in, we preserve these for your use. They are not made available to anybody else. And so you have control over how they're used and how they're accessed. All right, false positives. Yeah, let me know if that doesn't answer your question. We can definitely discuss more later as well. All right, so I'm gonna hit Ajit first, and then we'll go to Shema and Mohit. All right, so false positives. False positives can happen, but that's generally more a function of incomplete labeling, shall we say. So what you're doing is you're training a AI to understand your application, and occasionally run situations where somebody will mislabel something as something that's not supposed to be, and we'll end up with false positives that way. But generally, we run into less of them simply because we're not dependent on the DOM, we're not dependent on code or identifiers or anything else, and so we don't run into weird issues where the identifier might mislocate something, where it might find something on the page that looks so much the identifier they're using, or something similar. All right, and let's see, for failed scenarios, image-based or similar boxes items on screen. So we can use, so one thing we can do, and I didn't demo it here, is our AI is not just focused on images themselves. They're focused on location on the page. They're focused on proximity to other elements. And so it's just a matter, if we're looking for distinguishing between similar items or similar boxes on a screen, we're able to label those separately and have the AI take into account proximity and location and things like that to be able to distinguish between similar elements. All right, and then last question, we are running up close to the half hour, but Mohit, can we integrate with CI/CD tools? So with this, I mean, this is Selenium. It doesn't get in the way of any integration that you might traditionally do with CI/CD, with Jenkins, Circle CI, or anything else. This is literally just a wrapper for the existing Chrome driver. Now, we do also have a full platform TestAI.
You want to go back to your slides?
I'm going to go back to my slides on that really fast, because there we go.
And make them bigger so it's on the whole screen.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. There we go. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and there we go. So yeah, so let's see. We do have a desktop version. This also allows auto navigation and reinforcement learning. We get more tools with the desktop version than we do just with the SDK, but that also allows us, allows integration with CI/CD and everything else. All right, and one last thing I want to talk about before we close on the hour. So right now you can get the Python SDK at testai.sdk. Appium SDK is available at GitHub, test.ai, Java Appium SDK demo. And so we can go and you can start playing with those immediately. And I want to point, and we do have Espresso, Cypress, Playwright, etc. coming soon. But just to close up, I want to point out a couple of, to reinforce a few things. You can reduce fragility for your existing tests using our backup selectors. You can improve your flexibility and accelerate test building using AI native selectors and interactive machine learning training. This adds UX validation with no additional work. And finally, and I can't emphasize this enough, it's free. There's next to no additional work to start taking advantage of this, and there's no cost to doing so. So I highly recommend everybody go out and start playing with this. And then finally, the last question, Samadhi, we support API testing in the same sense that you do. If you're doing API testing in Selenium, then we would not interfere with that anyway. All right. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming. I've appreciated you and your questions. And I want to point out next week, next Thursday, 9 a.m. Pacific time, we're going to be doing a webinar on accelerating testing with AI, where we're using our desktop version, the full TestAI platform to build, create, and maintain tests. All right. Thank you very much and have a great day.